Jaleel White of Family Matters fame. If you don't know, if you're not around those times, he played a character named Steve Urkel, and then he came out with his name as Stefan. Like, he had a very iconic role on a very iconic show from the 90s. Right here, he played this character named Steve Urkel. I believe his catchphrase is, "Did I do that?" Like, you know, if you're around at the time, he was iconic. It was iconic. It was one of the iconic sitcoms of the 90s. And, you know, he had an alter ego, I believe Stefan Urkel as well. This is Jaleel White. Middle is Steve Urkel. The right is Stefan, the cool side of it, which I believe y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he went to some, like, he was like a nerd scientist. He went to some machine and he came back as, or drank some things. If you watch Dr. Dolittle with Eddie Murphy, it's basically that. Not Dr. Dolittle. Nutty Professor with Eddie Murphy. That is basically what happened. He drank some shit and he became cool and became Stefan and got the girl and got all the love. But he was very, very iconic from the 90s. Not a lot of people still maybe remember him, but at that time period, if you're around, iconic. He had a lot of things to say about kind of his show's importance and role and relevancy in terms of, let's say, Black culture and culture in general, and like how people view it, and not necessarily things that everybody agrees with. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of it, but he did have some things that were worthy of some conversation. He had some things he talked about, like how it's such an overlooked show because of certain reasons. And you'll see what we're talking about when we watch this video. Let's go.
The holidays are here. It's that time of year to think about, yes, gifts, but not only gifts, it's the guests, the
this club. Lorna Rosa filling in for Jess. If you're just joining us, we were talking about something Jaleel White said yesterday during an interview, and this is what he said.
Being a part of the TGIF brand sometimes makes you feel like you don't completely belong in the pantheon of blackness. You know, blackness has been treated as a very monolithic experience in entertainment. You know, if it's not a hood story, it's not a black story. You know, sometimes I feel left out of that, you know, so it's like, you know, like if there's ever a poll and they say, oh, what are your favorite black shows? You know, Martin is in there, or Living Single, or any of those guys. I already know we coming in last. But if there's ever a poll and it's just like your favorite family shows and suddenly Martin's not in there or whatever, all of a sudden we rank really high. And so it's kind of interesting in how we look at ourselves, to be quite honest, even as black folks.
So we're asking.
Well, there was a lot said there. He's clearly feeling some type of way in his feelings. Looking back, this actually happens to a lot of artists and actors. And like when you kind of have a, you know, significant enough time away from the project or whatever that made you so famous and iconic in the first place, to kind of look back and reassess your kind of position in things, and particularly the culture. And like, obviously he felt some type of way about the way people kind of view him or like react to him and his show. Basically his show, it was turned out to basically be his show. And like, he didn't necessarily appreciate it. He feels overlooked. He feels underappreciated. And one of the main reasons he feels like he's overlooked and underappreciated and kind of in the pantheon of black shows and black sitcoms, especially from that time period, is because they weren't hood. He thinks if they were more hood, he would be more recognized, more loved, more appreciated than what he is. So basically what he's saying, all of the top sitcoms, especially from that time period, were all hood shows that showed only one aspect of black people and the culture. And he says it is an interesting way of how we view ourselves as a people and as culture. Anyways, basically saying like, we self-identify as hood, as hoodlums, as hood people, as people from the hood, as people from the struggle, people from like these neighborhoods, environments that are not very well portrayed, or like kind of the worst aspects of the culture at times. Well, he's saying that that's how black people kind of view themselves as a whole, and that is reflecting in the way that they view his show, Family Matters, because every other sitcom, black sitcom from the 90s was a hood show or hood tale, right? That is interesting. Let's keep going.
Asking, what are your thoughts? Let's start with you, Lauren.
I think I put Family Matters in the legacy black shows, and not just because it's I like all the shows I like aren't hood show. Like what happened to Living Single? Like there's a lot of shows that aren't hood stories that they're just good black shows. Like
it's definitely it's definitely in the legacy black shows, absolutely positively. Now I will say it didn't connect to me like some of the other shows, but it's definitely a legacy show. Like Different World was something that was the reason why I wanted to go to Hampton University. Yeah. You know what I mean? Cosby Show was so many things on the Cosby shows that was that I loved and that I did with my kids, and I see with my father, and just seeing a family on television, a successful family getting money. But
I mean, again, he had some very strong opinions, some very strong words. He's obviously felt some type of way about this. But if you look at the surface, if you even dig even a little deeper past the surface of what he was saying and really look at the shows that were coming out at that time that were considered black shows or black sitcoms, because there's definitely a period of the early to mid 90s where black sitcoms were having a moment. They were absolutely buzzing. They had huge audiences. They made a lot of people famous, and like we were definitely having a moment, even though they were relegated to their own kind of network, UPN. But they had their crowd, they had their audience, they had their success, and they had massive success. So there's definitely a time period where a lot of black people, a lot of black sitcoms were being out there. And if you even look a little bit past what he said and look at the shows that were coming out at that time, even before, the fact that he thinks that they were all hood shows just shows how out of touch and how bitter he really seems to be. Because I cannot think of one show that I watched and loved from that time period that were black sitcoms or black shows that at their core or at their basis were hood tales or hood stories. In fact, everybody that I remember watching were very successful young black adults that represented everything that was opposite of the hood. Yes, they might have been in urban settings. Yes, they might have had an urban touch, but they were definitely not hood shows. As Envy here mentioned, Cosby, one of the biggest shows of all time, not just black shows, biggest shows of all time, showed a doctor with a complete family unit. Everybody in there was successful. Everybody in there was doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were the model family, so to say. And to be successful, to be loved, to be revered, you need to be a hood show. What about the Cosby Show? Like, that alone destroys this argument. But we can keep going because there's a lot more shows that we can mention. Because he also mentioned different family or different shows, whatever he said. So that I didn't necessarily love, but there were other shows out there. But let's keep going.
Matters. I love watching it, but it didn't connect. It's hard for me to remember episodes of Family Matters like I do Different World, or like I do Martin, or like I do Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or like I do The Cosby Show for some reason. I don't know why, but those shows connect more to me than Family Matters did.
I also feel like, why have this conversation now? Because there are a lot of people who look at
it. That's why.
Yeah, but like, why bring that in? I don't know. I don't see the point in highlighting that, or maybe we only got a clip of it, because there's so many people who look at him as like, this is Jaleel White, this is Urkel, this is, that's a big thing for a lot of people. Like, he's recognized through generations. So it's like, why would you take away from that?
Charlamagne?
I would absolutely mention Family Matters as a legacy black show. It is a show from that golden era of 90s black TV, but I highly disagree with what Jaleel's saying about shows having to be hood to connect, because he knows better. He comes from the era of black excellence on TV. He mentioned Martin and Living Single. Those shows he named weren't hood at all. In fact, everyone on those shows had great careers. Martin was a radio personality. Khadijah was the CEO of a magazine. Gina worked for a PR firm. Maxine Shaw was a lawyer. Mm-hmm. So I often ask myself,
Tommy ain't had no job, but
I often ask myself, how did we go from all the positive black representation of the 90s to the reality TV show nonsense of the early 2000s? And
I mean, again, he mentioned more shows. Like, I might as well just go ahead and hop right into it, because it just doesn't make sense to me, the things that he's saying, other than being maybe a little bit bitter. All right, best 90s black sitcoms right here. If you just look off top, look at the rankings. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, was that a hood show? No, in fact, the whole premise of the show is that he is leaving the hood, a situation in the hood that could have gone wrong, and lived and moved with his very wealthy uncle and aunt who live in Beverly or who live in Bel Air. I believe, was Uncle Phil a judge? I believe it was a judge. Very, very successful, very wealthy, country club going. Like, he left the hood, and it's obviously two different worlds coming together type of show. But like, nothing about that show is hood. The Wayans brothers. Yes, they also work kind of like in an urban environment. They work in a city, but they are workers in a hotel. Or is it a hotel? It's been a while. Either way, they had jobs. They had steady jobs, and it was just funny. It was just funny shit. Smart guy. Literally about a genius young black kid. Moesha. Anything but hood. Living single. Anything but hood. Sister. Anything but hood. Martin, one of the greatest black shows of all time. A lot of people would say their favorite black show of all time. Yes, they were in the city. Yes, it was very urban, but they were anything but hood. He was a radio DJ. His girl was a executive. They all had well-paying, highly positioned jobs, except for obviously Tommy and, whatever. But hang on, Mr. Cooper, teacher. But to like look back at those shows and be like, you had to be hood to connect is just wrong on every single level. The Parkers, they're in college. Like, what are we talking about? She's literally bettering herself in college. Steve Harvey show, he is a teacher. And yes, it seems to be like in the hood, but he is still a teacher. So even if you like dissect what he's saying, even a little bit, like his whole argument would rely on you not looking back at the shows that were out at that time to even take what he's saying seriously. It's not even to mention the Hughleys, My Wife and Kids. This is My Wife and Kids. My Wife and Kids, the Bernie Mac show. Like, it just goes on and on and on. Like, none of those shows were hood shows. So like, just because your show didn't quite connect at the same level as some of those others, it's not because they were hood. It's because they were just better, funnier shows. But let's keep it going.
For me, the reality of Family Matters is, yes, I put it amongst the legacy black shows, but I would probably rank it last among a lot of black shows simply because it's just not as good as those other shows.
Correct.
If you're talking about Fresh Prince of
Literally what I just said. Like, how can you compare yourself to Moesha, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Wayans Bros, Steve Harvey Show, Martin, Sister, like Smart Guy, like shows that resonated with a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and it has almost nothing to do with them being hood, just because they were just good.
Bel-Air,
The Cosby Show, Martin.
The Cosby Show, Different World,
yeah.
Living Single. I can't say Family Matters is better than any of those shows.
Not at all.
So he's
And I actually enjoyed Family Matter, but it was one that I would watch when there were none of those other shows on. I remember that.
friend of the room. I know we had a conversation with him. So y'all feel like that's just a cop out for him not wanting to admit that that show just wasn't as good?
I mean, maybe. What was the question?
Yeah, I don't know.
What was the actual question they asked him?
Because let me go look.
Because he was in Delaware, so I mean, he might have been misled. What was the question he was
what?
at? What was the question he was at?
No, what did you say before that?
I said he was in Delaware, so he might have been misled.
Go to hell.
Balari.
Lead you there.
Yeah. Hello.
Hey, what's up, brother? What's your thoughts?
My thoughts are,
I mean, I don't even think we need to go to callers on this. Like, it's clearly just a false argument, one that doesn't stand up to any level of scrutiny or examination. Like, if you look at the shows that were out there, they were just more successful because they were better shows. Like, you can admit that. Like, he probably has a hard time admitting it. Your show just wasn't as good as the other black shows that are out there. And it just didn't resonate with the same amount of people. It just didn't resonate as much as those shows did. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're still iconic. You're still one that a lot of people remember. You just weren't as good as the Fresh Prince or Martin or the list goes on. But to say it's because they weren't hood enough is blatantly ignorant and out of touch. And I don't really know what else to tell them. But there's one part that I did want to discuss about this is that one part of this is that Charlemagne also mentioned the hood shows that he's talking about, honestly, did not come around until recently. The ratchetness, the hoodness, I don't even know how to describe it. Just the ratchet hood shows, the garbage TV, the portrayal of us as only being drug dealers and criminals and gang members was not till later. I didn't grow up with that image of us as people, as a culture. I grew up watching shows like Smart Guy and Fresh Prince and Martin and like seeing them as successful just people in America. Not that they were from the hood, as like that wasn't a part of their identity. They were just people going through life. They weren't gangbangers. They weren't drug dealers. They weren't drug kingpins. They weren't like any of those things that you might see on TV now. So if anything, he should have been talking about current TV shows. Because if you look at all the current TV shows that are out portraying like the culture and Black community, we have definitely digressed. What are the most popular TV shows? I mean, outside of obviously there's like Girlfriend, The Shy, Blackish, and Atlanta, which is also still kind of in the hood, but not a hood show. The biggest shows that we have: Snowfall, Power, BMF, what's the other ones? Oh, you can think of, you throw like The Real Housewives, not in The Real Housewives, Love and Hip Hop, all the Ray J shit that he's putting out, the most ratchet, just wild, criminal shows are the ones getting the most talked about, the most buzz. Even like The Wire, even though it shows like a very real life kind of representation, not necessarily glorifying what's going on, almost like documentary style, but like The Power, BMF, the whole Love and Hip Hop shit, like that is the shit that he's talking about, where it's portraying us in a certain light. So if anything, we have regressed in a way that like the only thing that we want to see and consume is the almost worst aspects of the culture, the most raunchy, the most debauchery, the most ratchet, the most criminal. That is what we're consuming now. And that is a deeper conversation as to maybe why that is what's being pushed, why it's all we're seeing, why every story we're coming out is like some fucked up worst part of us. Where are the inspirational moments? Where's the inspirational shows, the aspirational shows? Like where's the sitcoms? Outside of like sitcoms basically being dead, but just where are the shows in general showing us in the same way that they used to in the 90s? That is a deeper conversation that he should be having, but instead he wanted to have a conversation about why his show isn't necessarily as beloved as past shows. And that answer is simple. It just was not as good. But again, the question of why we have somehow gone from the time period in the 90s where every show they were successful, they were family, they were well-to-do, they were workers, and why everything we're seeing now is basically they're criminals, they're gang members, they're drug dealers. That is a deeper conversation that he should be having, but he chose to kind of go the wrong direction in this. But maybe we'll have that conversation one day, because it is a very interesting turn. If you look back at the 90s, the way we were portrayed, especially on TV, could not be mad at. We were actually portrayed in a very, very positive light. Now, not so much.